Start. Big shout out to our friend Hoagie, who's here in the gallery, one of our former staff members. Good to see you back, mate. All right, everyone, it's 9 a.m. We'll open the meeting. We've got a full complement of member councillors, and we also welcome Councillor Taylor, Councillor Barden-Lumsden and Councillor Patterson this morning. Can we just move someone to move the confirmation of minutes from the last meeting? Moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor Owen Jones. All in favour? Against? Carried. Now we've got a number of conflict of interest matters that will arise during the meeting, so we'll deal with those now, starting with item, they're all in relation to 6.2, I think. So who's up first? Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. As on the screen, my conflict is, the name of the other person is Ganra Proprietary Limited, who were donated to my 2016 election campaign, a $10,000 donation, and I'll be leaving the room.
Thank you. Next one. Councillor Gates. So it's also on 6.2.
It is, Chairman, and I've made this declaration, I think, on 3 prior occasions, but I make it again today that UPS, who was a donor to my election campaign in 2014 and 15, they made a donation in 16, but it was refunded in full. Because both the Chair and the Divisional Councillor will have declarable conflicts of interest in this matter and have decided not to participate, I'm seeking the permission of Council to remain in the room and participate in the decision. Thanks,
Councillor Gates. So this is, you might recall this matter is returning from a couple of rounds ago. So Councillor Owen Jones, do you want to move something in relation to Councillor Gates?
So I'd like to move what we moved last time.
Okay, let's move what we moved last time.
And I can read that out to you if you'd like, Chair.
Wonderful.
So it'll be that Councillor Donna Gates may participate in the decision despite the Councillor's conflict of interest because it's considered as minor and remote, such that a reasonable person would trust that a final decision would be made in the public interest.
Seconded by Councillor Peter Young. You want to speak to that, Councillor Owen Jones? You happy with that? So, councillors, we'll take a vote on that and we'll call a division. Councillor Gates, Councillor O'Neill and myself will not be participating in this vote. All in favour? Councillor Hamill, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Vorster, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor Owen Jones. Against? And did not vote. Councillor Gates, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Caldwell. Okay, we'll just move down to the next conflict of interest once you've got that one. Thank you. So again, this one relates to my role in leaving the room. So I also have a conflict of interest with Ganra Proprietary Limited. I think we need to put the name of the related party in there. Awesome. In receipt of donation. So I think it's... Did you put in the top box or the bottom box for... Which one did you have it in, Councillor O'Neill? Bottom? Okay. All right, let's do it down there. Okay, so just down the bottom, if we can receipt a donation, nature of the other person's interest in the matter is... Yep. That's it. And then just above that, the nature of the other person's interest is parties associated with the donor are the applicant. Do you just want to check with the words that were used for Councillor O'Neill? Yep. So as has always been my position, I will be voluntarily leaving the room. So $10,000 donation on the 19th of February 2016. All right, that's all of the conflict of interests. So we've got a number of starred items. So Councillor Patterson, you wanted to speak to, not that we're going to deal with it now, but on 6.1 we're going to deal with. 6.2 we need to unstar for the various movements. 6.3 unstar for Councillor Taylor. 6.4 Councillor Vorster unstar. 6.5 remains unstarred, Councillor Peter Young. Now, just in some earlier discussions, we proposed adding a star to 6.6 and 6.7. Anyone object to that? Someone like to move those starred items, moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor Hamill. So that's items 6.6, 6.7 and 6.8. Yeah, that's all right. Do you want to just do that now? Okay. As in, you don't want it starred?
I think
you just have a question for after?
Stay unstarred at the moment, if you don't mind.
Unstar 6.8. Yeah, that's right. That'll close that off. All right. Thank you. So, mover of those start items. So, we're just refreshing on those 6.6 and 6.7 now. Take the vote. All in favour? Against? That's carried. All right. 6.1.
Forgive me while I just learn to drive this. Okay. Item 6.1, it's a presentation relating to a petition received by Council regarding the Southport Park Shopping Centre. There we go. The Southport Park Shopping Centre. In 2016, Council received a petition containing 51 signatures concerning noise from the loading dock at the Southport Park Shopping Centre, located at 163 to 171 Ferry Road, Southport. This petition seeks that Council mandates the installation of lock gates and restricts hours of access for deliveries. Whilst there has been a significant delay in response to the petition, noise concerns from the site are being actioned to reduce impacts to nearby residents. So historically, there have been various noise complaints received by the city. However, the focus of current complaints centre around the Woolworths loading dock, which I'll discuss further. However, in terms of the original development approval for the shopping centre, the land was rezoned local shopping on 23 May 1980 in accordance with the provisions of the City of Gold Coast Planning Scheme 1973 to facilitate the construction of the shopping centre. This approval did not contain any amenity, noise disturbance conditions or restrict hours of operation. So there have been various subsequent approvals over the site. The most relevant approval to this current issue relates to a development permit for a material change of use which was issued in 2016. So this approval relates to extensions to the existing Woolworths supermarket within the shopping centre and its loading bay. What this involved was the relocation of some back of house and relocation of the loading dock. It also involved the removal of the service station, which was on the site, and I've got a slide that I can show shortly that demonstrates the location of these. So the loading dock was moved 15 metres west. An acoustic report was submitted as part of the approval process. This report found that the site is appropriately separated from adjacent sensitive locations. Officers requested further information specifically relating to the loading dock. The subsequent information received indicated there was no expected increase in noise from the new loading dock and did not make any recommendations regarding the use of the loading dock. So I'll just flick forward. Actually, do I have a pointer? No. No, that's okay. All right, so if you look at the screen, oh, okay, yep, of course it is. So where the red arrow is pointing, obviously, is where the new loading dock is. The big red arrow? Yeah, well, yeah, the big red arrow, if you like. Just below the red arrow is a rectangular in a darker grey. That was where the original loading dock was. So it's probably important for me to point that out. So you can see that the loading dock moved approximately 15 metres west, and the darker roof at the western end of the shopping centre there are the additions that occurred as a result of this approval. So important to note too that there was a service station just to the west of the shopping centre, in between the park and the shopping centre, which was removed. So as a result of all this, there are no provisions of any development approval that can be used to mandate the installation of lock gates, restrict hours, or to regulate noise as requested by the petition. Officers have been using the provisions of the Environmental Protection Act to investigate noise complaints and are actively working with affected residents to gather information, including noise monitoring, to determine if the noise complaints constitute a breach of the provisions of the EP Act. So relevantly, under the EP Act, it is an offence for a person to cause environmental nuisance, such as unreasonable interference caused by noise. However, the EP Act does not specifically regulate hours of operation or noise level limits for the operation of a loading dock. So in conclusion, environmental health officers will continue to work with affected residents, and there's a recommendation in the report at 17 on page 5 of the report.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, you had a couple of questions?
Yes, first of all, through you, out of respect to these petitioners, could you please explain why a petition that was submitted to council and accepted in 2016 was not addressed, was not acknowledged, that further applications and changes were made on there without any consideration for that, and was only readdressed after I had to go through some pretty substantial hoops to ask for it to be requested 6-7 years later?
Through the Chair, Councillor, I understand that your concerns in that regard. I can't explain why it's taken so long. We can see, if we go back through records, we can see where the petition comes in, but we can't track what happens with it from there. So I really don't want to speculate on how that's happened. Obviously, it's not ideal, but yeah, with regard to full transparency, I can't comment on that because I'm not sure why or how that happened.
Okay, through you. So could I also ask, with the, I may have missed it, but is the exact date of the petition submission in the, have you got that? I've just got here that it's in 2016.
Yeah, I've got that. It is, it's dated, well, was received by us on 18 February 2016.
Right, okay.
Can I ask a question? Was it presented by Councillor Bell at the time?
I believe the petition was presented by Councillor Bell at the time.
See, I think if it was received to council on the 18th or to councillor or to the full council on the 18th, is it a date stamp that you're going by?
Yes.
Yeah, so it might be part of the answer, Councillor Patterson, is that we had a March local government election in March 2016. So Councillor Bell, so I don't know whether or not it may have never been presented to council in the overlap of Councillor Bell's retirement and Councillor Baldwin taking the seat in 2016, which may, so I don't recall it coming to council like a normal petition would, so maybe that's part of the answer.
Okay, so I've got a few more questions on it. So with the timing of it, so that means that the petition was submitted before we then went and made a decision on that space later, March 2016, right?
Through the GS Council, that's correct.
And could you also, regarding the acoustic report that was presented in April 2017, and I do appreciate the draft document that you had prepared for council has significantly changed in the last couple of weeks. But in what you had originally prepared, you noted that in that acoustics report, it indicated that there was a curfew from 10 to 7 a.m. and the operation of the loading dock during the curfew was not addressed in the report. But for the officers who were, and this was done by delegated authority, so for those who considered that report, they were considering that there was a curfew on the loading report. It was presented by the applicant. The acoustic report was reviewed and approved by city officers at the time, and it included a statement incorrectly that the loading dock had a curfew from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I see that you have omitted that from the planning committee members to consider now.
Through the Chair, Councillor, I wasn't aware that that detail was admitted, and if it was, I'm not sure why. It is included in the original acoustic report. I can see that Adam Morris is coming up behind me here, so would you like to make some comment, Adam? Yeah. Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Patterson, the circumstances around this development application for the extension, it's an extension to a lawfully established shopping centre development. So while the assessment was predominantly around the built form and the relocation of the loading dock, the existing use rights are enshrined under that previous development approval that Jason mentioned earlier, which didn't prescribe any restrictions. Now, we did note that the applicant had identified that there was a curfew. However, we were able to find no evidence of that, so it's more of a self-imposed curfew that was identified as part of the common material, notwithstanding the submitted acoustic report and the addendum acoustic report specifically in relation to the loading, identified that there was no need for acoustic attenuation for this physical relocation of the loading dock area.
So in the document that I have, and I appreciate that the report that I have is different to the committee members because it's changed quite a bit, but it does say that this did not relate to the operation of the loading dock, that the report did incorrectly state the loading dock had the curfew. When was it identified that the report incorrectly stated that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the identification of the curfew, that would have been through the assessment of the extension to lawfully established shopping centre development application. Okay,
thank you. So when we get on to, first of all, through you, Chair, if I could just go back and ask Jason a question. When you say that the concerns are being addressed now, I have to say that's not the experience of the residents that call me daily, that text me at 3, 4 and 5 a.m. in the morning. So it is surprising for me to hear that because I'm quite sure that's not the residents' experience. So could you elaborate on that, please?
So perhaps it would be more helpful if we can just talk a little bit about, given the fact that there's a lack of condition being imposed, what's the approach by council in trying to measure and enforce just noise issues?
Yeah.
Because I think that's We just need to bring this back. We can't re-argue.
Okay, so may I ask a question on that then?
We'll just hold for 1 second. So I think you're reading from something that's not within the public realm. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Would you like us to go into closed?
It won't make any difference, Councillor Patterson.
Well,
I'm just for the purposes of what needs to be helpful to the residents at the moment.
Okay.
We've got a certain set of circumstances which have been outlined, and that is that the decision was made in 2016, and the officers are currently trying their best to enforce the reasonable enjoyment of the nearby residential areas. So let's just get on the record how they're going about doing that.
Okay, sure.
So through the chair, councillor, Chair's quite right. We're using the Environmental Protection Act. Environmental health officers are using that to actively work with the residents to try and resolve their concerns. I do have the coordinator of environmental health operations here who could maybe give us a bit more of an outline about what those officers have been doing to try and assist the local residents.
So, Councillor Patterson, we just need to remember that there are circumstances where activities are not necessarily conditioned to prevent noise, but that doesn't make the noise okay. And the officers then use other avenues of enforcement. And that's what we need to focus on here, is recognising that it is still an issue.
Yep.
Given what we've got in front of us, how do we actually manage that to the best, for the best interests of the nearby residents?
So on that, I would like to, I've presented it to Councillor Young, that the original recommendation that you presented to me 3 weeks ago, that the committee can consider that now, because that would do more to potentially consider the petitioner's concerns going forward. So you did confirm that it was recommended that any further changes that be made to any relevant development approvals, consideration be given to the requirement for an updated acoustic report. And I see that that's now been withdrawn, but I think it would be worthwhile adding that back into the change recommendation.
So, Councillor Patterson, I understand the thrust of what the message that sends, but we probably can't tie a future council assessment process to that decision. I wouldn't have thought. Mick, can you just explain that, perhaps, for Councillor Patterson?
I can clarify some of that. So there was a draft recommendation. I actually asked the guys to remove that part of the recommendation because, similar to what Councillor Caldwell said, if any future application comes in that's not relevant to the loading dock area, you couldn't reasonably impose a condition that tried to put some further restrictions on this part of the development. If an application came in that was related to the loading dock area, absolutely we could, but can't preempt that decision until we actually have an application in front of us.
And I mean, I think the good thing is that this is now, this particular item has been created by the planning department. It will sit on the file against that property, and if there is future assessments to be undertaken, this has now been flagged as something of concern. So I think that would be reasonable to assume that the officers would have a level of alertness to the issue,
Okay, so I suppose my final question through you, if I may, is this isn't resolved for residents. They first made this petition in 2016. It is a consistent issue for the long-term residents who were here when that petition was made, and new residents who move into that street in that area are contacting me, independently of any other neighbour. So what do we do? What do we do? We've said that it's not acceptable. You've said that we are doing what we can within our means, but it clearly isn't working, what's currently being done. Okay,
through the chair, Councillor.
Look, I think what we're better off to do, can we just put the resolution up on the screen? And I'm not sure if some of the residents in the gallery today, you hear from in relation to that at all? No? Okay. Oh, they're from the south. Lovely. Let's just bring up the recommendation. So take off the yellow bit because that's not in. And, you know, maybe it's the case, Councillor Patterson, you've obviously got a good level of communication with these residents. If that's when you choose to engage with them, that's good. But, you know, I think the important thing is that within the bounds of what we've got today, the outcome that's on the screen is actually the best solution the council can offer. And so we need to be explaining that process to them, that it doesn't matter that there is a curfew or there's not a curfew, that if someone is creating noise at 3 a.m. in the morning and it's against EPA provisions, that we as a council will continue to take steps to act. So, Councillor Worcester.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And I'm very, very sympathetic to the plight of residents there at Southport. And I know when we had a Coles development come up through Varsity, city officers were very careful to ensure that there were curfews put in place and good acoustic mitigations to reduce the impact to adjacent homeowners. I just wonder if there is an appetite to carry this recommendation today, and I'm keen to support it, whether we should actually take the step of council, either our CEO or the Mayor, writing to Woolworths, actually putting them on notice around the issues that are important to this community and how their behaviour might be letting down the neighbourhood. I just think that might actually get us to where we need to be by giving them something to respond to in the public domain.
Councillor Patterson, have you spoken to Woolworths at all? Have you spoken to the operator?
Yes.
Okay. And do you think it would be helpful if we had...
I don't think it could hurt.
No. Okay. All right, so why don't we add a 3, that the Mayor write to the
to the Chief Executive Officer,
to the CEO of Woolworths
yes,
Limited.
So I'd suggest not only the tenant but the property owner as well,
Yes.
because it's actually the property owner that's got the skin in the game.
yeah.
Sorry, Woolworths and the landowner of Southport Park Shopping Centre to raise the residents' concerns and to seek their cooperation in addressing the conduct of the loading dock to maintain residential amenity. To achieve or improve residential amenity or something like that. I mean, that's just a suggestion. I'm sure that the Mayor's Chief of Staff, who I saw floating around earlier, will work something out. All right, someone like to move that, please? Moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor Peter Young.
Yep.
Any further debate or discussion?
It's about time these residents get their woolies worth.
I don't think that added much. I really don't. All right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Sorry, question? Or?
I was just going to say that we had a not a dissimilar situation to this at the Bunnings warehouse at Oxenford. With the Regatta Waters residents, and our office actually wrote to them and they modified their it was the forklift trucks, and they actually had a work health and safety issue around the modification. So, but they did strike a balance there. So sometimes correspondence works just as well.
Here. All right, take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Now, Councillor Vorster, you wanting to move the Rabina matter, you just wanted to vote against it. I thought we might be able to deal with that quickly and then...
Just to be noted as against, that's all.
Because that way we can release those officers. So 6.4.
I'm happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor Owen-Jones. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. And
I want to amend and add a third story to it.
Moved by Councillor Owen-Jones, seconded by Councillor Gates. Take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. And we'll just note that Councillor Vorster voted against
It already had the yellow line. What's wrong with it?
What's that, buddy? Needs another yellow line.
It's got the yellow line.
He didn't like the compliance with the city plan.
And then Councillor Peter Young, again, before we dive into another heavy one, I think 6.5, you wanted to add an extra condition to that. Did you require a presentation, or were you?
I have sought a very brief presentation, if you don't mind, Chair.
All right. So Lara, what are you doing here? 6.2. All right.
She's in order.
All right, great. Well, at 6.2, if we just note it's 9:30 a.m, Councillor O'Neill and I will leave the room, and I'll leave you in Councillor Gates's capable chairmanship.
Far away. So, are we going to have a presentation, a brief one? Thank you.
All right. Good morning, councillors. Item 6.2 is regarding a development application for an other change to material change of use approval for a mixed-use development comprising a range of residential, tourist and commercial uses at the former Kira Beach Hotel site within the Kira locality. This item was presented to the committee on the 20th of April 2023. At the meeting, there was discussion in relation to the noise impacts from the resort hotel's rooftop pool and bar area, and the committee requested additional conditions be imposed to manage this area. The committee supported the officer's approval recommendation. On the 21st of April 2023, the applicant stopped the current period for the application. This meant that Council was unable to decide the application at the 27th of April Council meeting. At the Council meeting, Council resolved to defer the decision until a later date. On the 15th of May 2023, the applicant elected to provide supplementary information regarding how the application addresses noise impacts. Additional drawings were also provided to illustrate the separation distances to surrounding buildings and the appearance of the development to Musgrave Street. The decision due date was 23rd of May 2023. The application is now outside of statutory timeframes. At the Council meeting, councillors requested city officers to provide additional information and amended development conditions regarding noise impacts from the resort hotel rooftop pool and bar area. Specifically, key concerns were raised regarding potential noise impacts on sensitive receivers external to the site. In particular, the following matters were discussed: operational controls and restrictions that could be applied to the resort rooftop pool and bar area, establishment of a noise complaint register, and the requirement for the hotel operator to undertake noise monitoring. In response to the committee concerns, officers have amended the conditions package as follows. So we've amended condition 7, as you can see on the screen, in relation to operational restrictions for the resort hotel rooftop communal open space area. So this access is for hotel guests only. Access to the general public is not permitted. Swipe access will be required for hotel guests to access the roof, and no live music is permitted. We've included a new condition, number 13, in relation to a dedicated complaint line and register. So a noise complaint register is to be kept on site to record and respond to all noise-related complaints. The register is to be managed by the hotel duty manager or competent staff member, and the noise complaints register is to be available to council upon request for inspection. We've also included a new condition, number 14, in relation to in-house amplified music and noise systems. In-house amplified sound and noise systems are to be fitted with a sound limiting device to ensure the amplified music sound level limit is in compliance with the approved acoustic report. The updated conditions provide greater certainty in relation to the operation of the rooftop area. City officers are satisfied the updated conditions mitigate noise impacts, provide effective compliance controls, and are reasonable and relevant. Regarding the request for a noise monitoring condition, Council's Environmental Health section have advised against imposing such a condition. Noise criteria enforcement is undertaken by OLGR under liquor licensing requirements. In this regard, City officers do not recommend imposing such a condition as it will be more effective for OLGR to undertake noise monitoring, which is standard practice. On the 15th of May 2023, officers received a further clarification letter from the applicant, which they elected to provide following the Planning and Environment Committee meeting. This can be found on page 384 of your agendas. The correspondence includes further detail on the operation of the rooftop pool and bar area for the resort hotel. The correspondence confirms the rooftop area is for the exclusive use of resort guests who are assigned a room to the hotel, and highlights there are solid enclosed elements along the eastern and southern side of the Building 3 rooftop bar and pool area, assisting with acoustic attenuation. This can be seen in the green section there highlighted. Additional drawings were also provided to illustrate the separation distances to surrounding buildings and the appearance of the development to Musgrave Street. This drawing demonstrates the separation distances between on-site and surrounding buildings. This additional elevation provides context to the relation of the Building 2 podium's interface with the Grand Corniche located to the north on Kira Hill. The elevation illustrates the separation between the two developments and the positioning of the Grand Corniche, which will sit higher than the podium of Building 2. This additional perspective illustrates the appearance of the Building 2 podium from the northern end of Musgrave Street. The perspective illustrates the bulk and height of the podium is offset by the topography of the headland and the vegetation that will remain in the road reserve. Officers' recommendation and conditions of approval, with the exception of conditions 7, 13 and 14, remain unchanged. This is also applicable for the agenda report, with the exception of the first 4.5 pages explaining updates, which is as per the report previously presented on the 20th of April 2023. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And as I did last time this was considered, I just want to disclose that I've met with the residents who have been, most in contact with city officers, but also the developer now. So I've had an opportunity to speak with both parties, and I just want to put that on the record. My questions just take us back a little bit earlier in the process, and in fact, concentrate on process. So, Madam Chair, if I could just turn our attention to page 66. I need some assistance from city officers to walk me through the way in which this application was assessed, and particularly to respond to some suggestions residents have put to me that there might be errors in process. And I'd like clarification. I need it in order to arrive at a fully informed decision. Halfway through the second paragraph on page 66, it says here, Section 82 of the Planning Act sets out the decision-making rules for assessing and deciding other change applications. So this is an other change application, and the Planning Act, state legislation says we need to have a look at Section 82. Now, later on in the fourth paragraph, it says, in addition to the above, the subject application is impact accessible. Pursuant to Section 82, 4D of the Planning Act, officers must assess the development having regard to any matters prescribed by Section 45, 5A, 2 or B. Okay, so I'm happy to take that on face value. But the next sentence says, this permits discretion in decision-making by having regard not only to the assessment benchmarks which apply, but also any other relevant matter which may determine be determinative in deciding the application. So could I get a sense, when section 82 and 45 and those clauses are taken together, what are the things that we must take into consideration, and what are the things that we may take into consideration when assessing this development application?
So through the Chair, Councillor Vorster, you're correct, it's an other change application. So it's assessed in the context of the original approval. So we have to keep in mind that on this site, there's an existing approval for a 16-storey building and a 10-storey building. They're obviously the highest ones on the site. So in terms of this other change application, obviously there is some additional height and some additional changes to the built form. So they're assessed basically in the context of that original approval that's on the site. We can have regard to relevant matters as well, which we have done throughout the report, and they were highlighted at the last committee meeting as well. Right,
so I'm going to put a proposition to you, which is my understanding, and I need that challenged and corrected. My understanding is that when we receive an other change application, and where that, to the extent that that other change application may be in conflict with an existing approval, we must have regard to any prevailing regulation, and we may have regard to other factors. And in this case, the prevailing regulation is version 8 of the city plan. Is that fair?
Through the Chair, so yes, the earlier planning scheme that the application was decided is different to what we're dealing with now in terms of we've got the current version, but it's still in the context of the original approval. So we're looking at the difference of the additional height and the difference in the built form.
And sorry, Madam Chair, I just really think it's important to tease this out, so I thank everybody for their patience. So can you explain what takes precedent, the original approval or the earlier approval, or the provisions of the 8th version of our city plan? So if there's a conflict, what do we have to have most regard to?
Through the Chair, to the best of my recollection of the Act, there's not one thing that takes precedent, but the Act gives the rules for an impact DA, and then it provides additional rules for other change applications. So it's a balancing act. We must have regard to that original approval or the original development approval when considering the assessment benchmarks in the scheme. So I don't think I can tell you which one takes precedent because that, to the best of my recollection, is not specified in the Act. But for each application that comes in, we've got to do what we think is, a balancing act, if I could put it that way, of both.
Sure, and my questions are, I'm attempting to be as absolutely respectful as possible. I'm asking them for my benefit, right? So I'm not suggesting that there's necessarily an error here, but I just need to get this straight in my head. So section 82, part 4, says, it is declared that the following matters apply only to the extent that matters are relevant to assessing and deciding the change application in the context of the development approval. And it lists at least 5 items. So number 1, the assessment benchmarks. Number 2, referral agency matters under section 55(2). But number 4 says, if impact assessment matters under section 45, 5A, 2 and B. Now, that section is referred to in the 4th paragraph on page 66. I'm not trying to surprise anyone here. Section 45, 5A, 2 says, assessment must be carried out against or having regard to matters prescribed by regulation. And section 45, 5B, right, which also appears in paragraph 4 on page 66, says assessment may be carried out against or having regard to any other relevant matter. And my understanding is that the earlier approval is the any other relevant matter. If that's wrong, I need clarification on that point, please.
Through the chair, any other relevant matter, this is an impact assessable application, so we can have regard, obviously, it's an impact DA, so all of the planning scheme is a benchmark, and any other relevant matter can be, and as we outlined in the previous committee, so a relevant matter that we've assessed and that we've had regard to is previous planning decisions, so being that there's an existing approval for a 16-storey, 10-storey, a 4 and a 3-storey on the subject site. The proposal represents substantive compliance with the balance of city plan benchmarks. The proposal presents an appropriate character outcome. The proposal presents a high-quality architectural outcome. We spoke about the hard impacts, being the visual impacts, the amenity impacts and shadowing. We spoke about the economic benefits, so all of these things are relevant matters.
And the emerging character of the locality, right? Turning to page 67. Now, I suppose my question is, do these relevant matters that we've tested this against, when we look to 45B or whatever it is, are they prescribed in the Act or in regulation, or did city officers develop the criteria against which the application was assessed?
Through the chair. So relevant matters is what officers can consider in the assessment of the application. So the applicant can put forward relevant matters that they ask us to assess as part of the assessment process, and we can also have relevant matters developed throughout our assessment process.
Okay, but it's kind of like when Sizzler existed, right? There's a big smorgasbord. I don't eat fish, so I don't go to that part of the buffet. But I'll go eat a lot of cheese toast, right? My concern is that I don't see anywhere where there has been a list of usual relevant matters against which this development has been assessed, and instead the impression I get is we've picked, in our own estimation, the best relevant matters, and we've assessed the development against those, and it feels very arbitrary. So can you give me some confidence, please, that the relevant matters that we've picked against which this development has been assessed are robust and not very narrow in order to support the development?
Through the chair. So the relevant matters that are, I guess, described throughout our assessment report are definitely robust. They're in addition to the assessment benchmarks that we're required to assess the development against. And as I keep saying, in terms of looking at the underlying approval that exists over this site and still having regard to that and the extent of the change that's brought about by this other change application, that's what we're looking at and that's what we're assessing. And as Mick said, it is about a balancing outcome, but also looking at the development as a whole.
Right. So, Madam Chair, thank you for your patience. I know this is can be a bit frustrating to ask lots of questions. Would it be fair to say that the assessment benchmarks, apart from these other relevant matters, lie in City Plan version 8?
Correct.
Okay. So the Act contains lots of explanatory notes, and you've been kind enough to provide an extract here on page 66, paragraph 3. But there are other explanatory notes in the Act, one of which reads as follows. If there is a development approval for a 10-storey building and an applicant seeks to change the approval to add a further 2 storeys, this is sounding very familiar, isn't it? The additional 2 storeys is intended to be assessed in the context of a 10-storey building. Now, here's the important bit. Against the assessment benchmarks relevant to a 12-storey building in that locality. Mm-hmm. The sense I get from that explanatory note is that notwithstanding there was a 10-storey approval beforehand, mm-hmm. we are to look at a 12-storey building and test it against City Plan version 8. And I suppose my question is, anywhere else, if there was a mapped height of 3 stories, would we approve a 12-storey or 15-storey outcome under City Plan version 8?
Through the chair, that's a difficult question to answer, and I think in this particular site, we're going on the fact that there's an existing approval for a 16 and 10-storey building already here. So, as I said, we're looking at this as a whole. So we're looking at this development. There's been no change to building 1, which is the tallest building. Okay, so we're looking at building 2 primarily and building 3 at the front of the site. So building 2 going from 10 storeys to 13 storeys, we're looking at that as a 13-storey development and assessing it against the benchmarks.
Right. Madam Chair, I promise I'm wrapping it up now. I fully acknowledge that my line of questions have touched on height, but as you'd recall from committee meeting, I've got some concerns around the interface of the development and particularly the bulk and scale at the perimeter and periphery of the site. The Musgrave bulkiness, that 70-metre stretch, gives me the heebie-jeebies. I appreciate the applicant has provided us a new perspective, but it actually doesn't, they haven't shown us a perspective from the middle of Musgrave Ave looking at the building. It's taken up the hill, and I don't think that has given us as much information as we might need to test this notion of the development being compliant with the emerging character of the locality. So just on the development itself, and then I'll wrap it up with 2 last very quick questions. When you have given or had regard to the positive contribution that this will have to the emerging character of the locality, could you please point to a development nearby that foreshadows this character? Because for me, this appears to be the beachhead development setting the standard. It doesn't seem to be, I mean, it's a great looking development, but it's the one breaking new ground. I don't have a sense that there is comparable developments.
Through the chair, this is one of a kind, I guess, for the area. It's a huge 8,000 square metre plus site. It's a neighbourhood centre zoning, which does encourage or higher intensified developments on these sites. Throughout the assessment in our report, we have concluded, I guess, that we are comfortable with the development, in addition to our visual amenity expert who has assisted us with the assessment as well, and we're comfortable with our recommendation for an approval.
And lastly, Madam Chair, we heard before that we're now outside the decision period.
Correct.
Does that mean, notwithstanding any council resolution to support this development with these new conditions, that the applicant could exercise their right to claim a deemed refusal and take this to the Planning and Environment Court?
Through the chair, we are outside of those statutory timeframes. So they, in terms of being able to, put future stop the clock so no decisions can be made, that can't occur now that we're outside of the decision period. Yep.
But say council approved it with these added conditions, right?
Yep.
Our approval sits outside of the approval window. Right? Does that mean that the applicant could actually say, notwithstanding your approval, we will take this as a deemed refusal and seek approval through the courts?
Through the chair, once a decision is made at full council, and if an approval is supported at that point in time, then it would be an appeal based on our current recommendation, if that was like a submitter appeal.
Okay, so that window only affects their ability to stop the clock.
Councillor Vorster, Mick, I'm sure that the deemed approval process does not exist for impact accessible.
Deemed refusal.
Deemed refusal, sorry.
You're right, Chair.
It doesn't exist for impact accessible applications.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, there's no deemed approval. Between now and the full council meeting, the applicant could, if they wanted to, go to court and say, we've deemed this application to be refused and we're appealing it. But once
that's right.
Once council makes its decision at the council meeting, that's the decision. There's no ability for a deemed refusal.
Okay, so between committee and full council, they have the right to claim a deemed refusal. and have this matter considered through the court rather than ultimately by council in a couple of weeks.
Through the chair, that's correct. And then once council makes its decision, of course, they've got their appeal rights at that point as well.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So could I just ask a question in regards to, well, there's a couple of places that it's described, but on page 63 where the officers discuss the negotiations that took place in 2022 regarding the bulk of the building, and there's the blue shaded area which shows a reduction from what was originally applied. Were there any discussions that the officers had about lowering building 2's height?
Through the chair, yes, there were discussions about both the length of the building and the height. In terms of getting this reduction that's shown in blue, I'll just get it on the screen. Somewhere. Oh. That one there is probably the best one. So the pink is the additional height on building 2, and as you can kind of see to the left, there's that blue dotted line, so that's what was originally submitted. So there is some reduction in height as part of the negotiation throughout the assessment process, and obviously that bulk part on the left of the building there represents about 11 metres.
And was that fundamentally driven because of, I'm going to say, the shadow of building 1? So behind the height is building 1. So building 1's taller?
So through the chair, so building 1 is to the right of the screen, so it's not shown in this image at all.
Yeah, yep. But the height of building 2 in part was dictated by the height of the approved and constructed building 1.
Through the chair, not so much, I guess, dictated. It was just what the applicant proposed. So obviously, at 10 stories is what was originally approved in 2019, and then obviously now they've come in for 13 stories. But building 1's always sat at that 16-storey mark.
Yeah. So during negotiations, you effectively reduced the size of the footprint by changing the bulk that originally asked for.
Yes.
If they hadn't agreed to that, do you think that would have been grounds for us to have a different officer's recommendation today?
Through the chair, potentially, yes. Yep.
Yeah. So, and then if I could just ask a question in regards to the Office of Liquor and Gaming and the suggestion that we had made at the last committee meeting in regards to actually monitoring it. Yes. So the officer's proposed condition here talks about a register being available to the city, but the actual enforcement of that would sit with the Office of Liquor and Gaming, wouldn't it? So because it would be a breach of their licensing obligations. So would it make sense for that register to also be made available to not only the city but also the Officer of Liquor and Gaming?
Through the chair, that can be arranged, yep.
Yeah. And do we have any sites where we have, and I accept the environmental health officers had said that they didn't support monitoring, but do we have any sites where we actually do require monitoring of noise?
Through the chair, I'll just refer to Pete, but saying no, we don't.
Yeah, so my lived experience of the night quarter was resident complaints. You go to the Office of Liquor and Gaming, they do some noise, so it almost like cuts out a period of time if there was actually a log of noise, you know, and it's not until Officer of Liquor and Gaming either pursue a complaint or ignore a complaint that you can actually do something, and even then it's not the council that does it. So I'm still a bit doubtful as to whether or not this approval, if we go down that path, would benefit from having an actual log of noise. So that's not a question, I can accept that.
Okay, any other questions, councillors? Councillor Owen-Jones.
So unless somebody wants to move any changes, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation, which is what I did at the last committee stage.
Would you like to amend condition 13
I definitely,
and add
I would
the
definitely want to add
OLGA?
the Office of Liquor and Gaming, or any mechanism there that allows the city to share that information freely.
I think we just have to say shall be made available to council and the OLGA upon request.
Yeah, or the state of Queensland, if we want to make sure that it, whatever it is, so whether or not it's an Office of Liquor and Gaming or a policing issue, you know, so if it's a noise complaint, sometimes they go to the QPS as well. So I'm in the officer's
Your
hands.
motion, you move it.
Well, I'm in the officer's hands as to what the most effective state agency might be. You know, so we could either be very broad, and because we're saying the City of Gold Coast, we could say the state regulators, or we could be more narrow and say Office of Liquor and Gaming and Queensland Police Service.
Through the chair, I'd recommend the state based on Councillor Owen Jones's comments. So if it could be amended to the council and the state government.
Happy with that, Councillor Owen Jones?
It's my motion, so yes, thank you.
Thank you. And that is seconded by Councillor Hamill. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Owen Jones?
Only briefly, and only to say that it's a difficult proposition that we have today because of the changes to the state legislation. Basically made it very difficult for the city councillor for the area to be in the room, whereas previous legislation would have enabled the people's representative to be here. So I just want to acknowledge that. The challenge that I think that we have is that we're not lawyers in the room, and the interpretation of the Act and the regulations is very difficult, and I can clearly see from a resident's point of view where they see 3 stories and an approval that it adds to the height of an existing approval as something that is in conflict. But I accept the officer's recommendation and their explanation to Councillor Vorster in regards to the need for us to strike that balance between acknowledging the approval that already exists for the 10-storey building, and then that balancing act for this being a change other in regards to the process. So I'm not really concerned about it being out of time. I think that the applicant had provided some information as to some, and has had some of the submitters, but the applicant had suggested that it's spent over $1 million on consultants' fees to achieve effectively what they're trying to do. And so I don't see a real risk in regards to a decision being made at committee and a decision being made at council in regards to out of time. But unless it doesn't suit them, and then we're in the same position as what we would be today. So, I think that it's important to note that it is a unique site, and it's a city block of effectively 8,000 odd square metres. So, and then I look at the images on page 75, which is the aerial view showing the local context and the number of other approvals that and constructed buildings that exist for similar heights and similar footprints, and I think that that's important to acknowledge as well in regards to the context of this site.
Thank you. Do I have a speaker against? Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank Councillor Owen Jones for acknowledging Councillor O'Neill, who is not in an enviable position at all. And I'm sure she would have had something to contribute to this debate had the state government not changed that legislation. I think I also want to acknowledge the work of city officers who have had to wrestle with the complexities of state legislation and their own city plan. They've had to write multiple reports now that must be quite harrowing. To have to revisit the same DA over and over again. But I also want to acknowledge the applicant who took time to meet with me and to set out their vision for the site. They're very excited about what they hope to deliver, and I get a sense that they're acting in good faith. But most of all, I want to acknowledge the work of the residents who contacted me. Quite often, I'm sure all of us are contacted by residents who might oppose a development because they don't like the look of it, they don't like the shadows, they don't like the sound, they don't like this, that and the other, they don't like the vibe. But I have been provided time and time again with the most thoughtful and well-reasoned documentation that I have ever seen from anyone on a planning matter. This information, I'm sure, has been sent to every other councillor, and it is the most extraordinary body of work that has ever been produced by residents concerned about the future of their neighbourhood.
Could I just add, with great courtesy as well?
Absolutely. The way in which these two parties have conducted themselves is quite extraordinary. And as I was quoted in the paper recently as saying, the problem we have is a gulf has opened between these two neighbours because of the state legislation, not because of the planning scheme. Now, I'm not supporting this development application today because I don't believe that we have got the balance right. My reading of the explanatory notes and the Act actually, to my reading, says that the balance should always be in favour of the city plan. And while we can have consideration to other matters, that is a discretion that we can take. And in fact, the city officer's report says here, pursuant to section 82(4)(d) of the Planning Act, officers must assess the development having regard to any matters prescribed by section 45(5)(a)(2) or B. And the next sentence, this permits discretion. It is council's discretion to tilt the scales the other way. And on balance, I don't think that is appropriate. And I don't think it's appropriate because the existing approval is already quite a significant development that markedly exceeds the benchmarks in City Plan 8A, will generate jobs, will support the tourism economy, will add to the character of the area. What they have will already achieve what they aspire. Tilting the balance won't actually achieve much more, in my view, and I think will actually break faith with the community in that we hold very firm to City Plan. So for those reasons, I can't support it. I hope the councillors that do can reflect on maybe that closing comment between now and full council. But thank you to all parties, especially the residents, for the way they've conducted themselves.
Thank you, Councillor Vorster. Councillor Hamill, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I did at the previous committee on this, I think given the size of this development and the site and the history of it, it's only right that be on the record of why I'm supporting the application, so I'll do that again today. In approaching my decision to support this application, I just want to make the point, because it was raised with me by some residents, that I visited the site and the area on several occasions. I've also taken the opportunity to go through all of the submissions received, not just in this application, but also the submissions in the previous applications, to understand the community's long-held interests and what their concerns were. Again, and Lara made the point really well, so in my eyes, building one, given that it's already under construction, there's no changes, is not relevant to this application, except in considering the holistic site as a whole, in how do the other buildings work with the 16-storey building. In regards to building 2, so it seeks a height increase of 11.2 metres on the site. I think that a reasonable person can probably tell the difference between a 37-metre building and a 48-metre building. So there needs to be a strong consideration of what is the positive impact that is going to come with that and what other implications does it involve. In reviewing the technical reports, the extra height doesn't change the sight lines or the shadow impacts to a huge level for any local residents in the associated buildings. I believe that the far superior built form outcome, which in the report, in the details from our architecture area and the visual amenity expert, and as was come through last committee, the comment was that it's a superior architectural outcome compared to the currently approved building, and I agree with that, and I think that justifies the height increase on building 2. Building 3, being the resort building, I'm seeking a height increase of 5.1 metres and an additional 12 rooms in the hotel. I don't believe that a reasonable person looking from the street is going to be able to tell the difference between 19 metres and 24 metres, and that the far superior built form outcome and landscaping outcome achieved justifies the height increase. I'm very happy that there's been due consideration and clarification of the access and noise concerns in relation to the resort pool, and I'm confident that the additional conditions now in place will mitigate these concerns. Madam Chair, one of the main things I hear from residents along the coastal spine that are affected by development applications or live in these suburbs is they hate when in one city block you end up with 4 or 5 or 6 buildings that don't work together at all, where there's no common architectural form, there's no common landscaping form, like they don't have any synergies together, that they don't like the look of that and they don't feel that adds to an area, which I think is really important here, that we've had a developer spend a decade amalgamating an entire city block. Like, we constantly are requesting this of the development industry. Amalgamate blocks, amalgamate blocks. We hear it from residents and community groups that we should be doing more to force people to amalgamate blocks. We can't force them to, but when they do it, we have to make sure we give consideration to the fact that it is a far superior outcome when an entire city block has a master planned development and approval on it versus what could have happened here, which is 6 or 7 separate buildings built by separate developers over time that may have not connected together at all, had no common built form outcomes, no common landscaping outcomes, and I think that would have been a disaster for what is a truly remarkable and landmark site in the city. Planning legislation and city plan, and I think Councillor Voss did an excellent job of reinforcing this for me today, that planning legislation and the city plan are difficult enough to understand at the best of times. When you compile this with several applications and changes, alterations over a decade, it becomes a very difficult thing to track, I think especially for local residents. And I would echo Councillor Voss's comments and Councillor Gates's comments on the quality of the material provided from residents, not just in this application but previous ones. And Councillor Gates's comment on the way they've gone about tackling the issue. So on the record, I would thank local residents for truly participating in the process and their ongoing interest in the development pattern of their suburb. In finishing, Madam Chair, again, I've taken the opportunity to visit the site on several occasions. I have carefully read in full every public submission received during notification for this application. I've read the response from officers to these main points raised in submissions and referred to the technical reports on each matter, and I'm confident that officers have addressed all issues raised to a more than satisfactory level. I believe the proposed development outcome is superior to the current approval and deserves the support of this committee and ratification at full council.
Thank you, Councillor Hamill. Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. I can't support the proposed development or the motion that's before us. There's just no way on earth I could. I think that we're faced with a very difficult decision. Obviously, it's divided us. I believe that the applicant has given scant regard for the reality of the town plan as it existed at the time of the original approval and as it exists now. I think that the applicant has created a divide in the community, and we are relying upon the goodwill of the community to provide us input as to how they interpret the city plan and what its provisions are, and in trying to protect the amenity and character of the area that they live in and have invested in as private citizens and business people. the departure from the city plan, between the city plan and this proposal, is just so radical that I won't even bother going through all of the various points, but clearly the height is a very significant matter that I think that is untenable for us to support in any way, shape or form. The reliance by the applicant on the economic benefit argument is not relevant, in my opinion, for the site. The fact that it appears, as Councillor Owen-Jones showed us with one of the images in the report, page 75, the fact that it appears as a consistent with the height, overall height of this proposed development is consistent with those along the coastline there, is in itself inconsistent with what the city plan has sought. There's a myriad of concerns, as I said, both in terms of the city plan but also in the operation, and I don't think that our conditions can effectively give confidence to the local community that in the long term their rights will be properly protected. Thank you.
Otherwise, I'm in, I guess, a more confused state than I have ever been, considering a development application before us. As the committee will remember, I voted against this initially and then was required to use my casting vote in support at the last committee meeting, and that was because there has always been a protocol where the chair or the acting chair goes with the officer recommendation. I'm going to shortcut the process today and I'm going to support the officer's recommendation with the change suggested by Councillor Owen-Jones. I'm glad that there have been amended conditions applied. I have had an opportunity to have a very close look at the entire situation, as we all have since the clock was stopped. I think overall I'm still torn because the departure from city plan is so very great, and I still fail to understand how the officers have not been able to give more regard to that and less regard to the existing approval. I don't understand that, and I think maybe the passage of time ahead of us will perhaps provide some clarity, because one way or the other I don't think this is the last time that this matter will be before us. But in changing my vote today, it's because I would support the officer's recommendation if it was 3-3 anyway. And I do think there have been some meaningful improvements along the way in terms of the increased separation to adjacent development. I don't think there is a huge impact on the visual amenity of the nearby other properties, and I don't think that with the increased attention to amenity that's been provided through new conditions, that noise will be an issue for them. So with that, I'll take the vote. Those in favour? We'll call a division. I'll do it myself. Councillor Hamill, Councillor Owen-Jones, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor Gates. Against? Councillor Peter Young and Councillor Vorster. That is carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers. Thank you, Lara, too. Okay. I've had a message that Councillor Caldwell won't be returning to the meeting, so we'll just continue. We'll get Councillor O'Neill back in, of course. Thank you. So that one's done, that one's done.
Chair, I did ask for a brief presentation on 6.5. I think that's coming up next.
Thank you. Thank you for helping me find my place. Oh, 6.3 as well. We have 6.3 that's unstarred for councillor Taylor. So is this 6.3? Thank you. Did you wish to have a presentation, councillor Taylor?
Thank you. Yes. Look, I obviously looking forward to the presentation. This applicant.
Do you want to wait till the presentation?
Yeah,
we'll have the presentation. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Are we building a city or not?
Through the chair. Good morning, councillors. My name is Nicola O'Brien, and being my first presentation, I thought it best to start with an introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 6.3 relates to a development permit for a material change of use to establish a hotel at 19 to 21 Tedder Avenue in Main Beach. The subject site is located in the neighbourhood centre and surrounded by the high-density residential zone to the east and medium-density residential zone to the west. The subject site is a historically amalgamated tenancy, as shown in red, within a larger lot outlined in blue. As shown on the screen, under the Gold Coast Planning Scheme 1994, two small tenancies were amalgamated into one, expanding the gross floor area on the site to 196 metres squared. The plan on the screen shows the existing restaurant of Manos Bar and Grill, which has been expanded over time with the addition of an outdoor dining area, shown in blue. This tenancy now has a total use area of 250 metres squared, and this fit-out is to remain as shown. For clarity, the applicant has stated that this development application has been applied for in order to remove operational restrictions on their current liquor licence. The existing approval and liquor licence required the primary service to be the provision of substantial meals. The applicant seeks a hotel liquor licence, which under the state licensing requirements requires a corresponding council land use approval, permitting consumption of alcohol as the primary use. The applicant states that day-to-day operations are to remain the same despite applying for this hotel land use. This, however, cannot be assured as development permits are issued onto the land and not to landowners. The existing restaurant and proposed hotel land uses are not considered to be comparable, and there are distinct differences in the amenity impacts from each. Key differences between the restaurant and hotel functions are found within the land use definitions, and they include scale and intensity, with differing primary and secondary operations, the provision of substantial meals, with meals being a secondary service to hotels, which can contribute to or exacerbate amenity impacts from the hotel, as well as the provision of accommodation, where hotels are capable of providing accommodation where restaurants cannot. The city plan states that the neighbourhood centres are intended to respond to the local convenience needs of the immediate 1 kilometre radius shown on the screen. They are to be pedestrian-orientated areas with smaller scale concentrations of business and employment uses. A hotel is not considered to be a small-scale land use appropriate for establishment within a neighbourhood centre. Through the City Plan strategic framework, there is a clear policy directive that new hotel and nightclub entertainment uses are not to be established within neighbourhood centres. Officers have reviewed the proposed development and determined that the land use represents a clear non-compliance with the City Plan provision. The applicant introduced relevant matters within the assessment process, which officers can and have had regard to. However, city officers do not consider the relevant matters to assist to substantiate a supported position despite the non-compliance. This neighbourhood centre is intended to be of a smaller scale and distinctly different to the nearby larger areas of Surfers Paradise, Southport and the Spit. Small-scale entertainment uses are contemplated within the neighbourhood centre under specific requirements for scale and amenity impacts. However, a hotel does not fit within the intent for the neighbourhood area and has the potential to impact upon the city's hierarchy of centres. It is important to note that today, officers' refusal recommendation will not impact on the site's ability to continue operations as a lawfully established restaurant. Officers, open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, do you have any questions? I'll go to Councillor Taylor first up.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a new application we're looking at the moment, but just want to understand the current approval for the current going concern. we talk about numbers that's a requirement for the current operation. Is there a limitation of numbers for the current operation use at the moment for patrons?
Through the chair, there isn't. And I suppose the intrinsic aspect of that approval is that it's the substantial consumption of meals with alcohol consumption as the secondary.
Okay. And another question in relation to parking. Is there any current approval requirements for parking limitations at the moment? So the current operation, what is the current condition in relation to parking requirements at this stage?
So through the chair, there's 46 car parking spaces on the premises. It's a rooftop car parking area. There is no delineation between the tenancies and how they're to take up each car parking space. So, yeah, I mean, it's run by secure parking, so there's 0 to 2 hours is free parking, paid after.
So what I'm saying is the condition for the current operation doesn't have a parking number requirement for its current operation with unlimited numbers?
Through the chair, not specifically. I mean, the originating planning scheme, which the 94 scheme, would have had a requirement, but the 46 spaces could be taken up. So there's no specific delineation inside that approval that sort of breaks up how car parking spaces are to be used.
Sorry, just on that one, how many tenancies have access to those 46 spaces?
There's 6 tenancies.
6 tenancies. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. In the report, you mention the provision of meals would no longer be a requirement and could not be a great number of intoxication, but patrons leaving the venue late at night. Just want to understand now with the current neighbourhood centre, which we have 14 restaurants in there at the moment and no unlimited numbers for the current operations, what consideration can you see a commercial hotel have a larger impact to the current operation, considering there's unlimited numbers at the moment with the current operation in relation to a commercial hotel and the impact of people going out into the amenities, including the fact we have 14 plus 2 other takeaway operations that are got liquor licensing?
So through the chair, I think it is a significant impact of having a hotel land use established in a neighbourhood centre zone where the primary function is the service of alcohol. I fully acknowledge there's restaurants that, through the Tedder Avenue Main Beach Neighbourhood Centre, with its primary use being for the consumption of substantial meals. So I think like for like, there's a significant difference there.
Thank you. And in relation to intoxication and managing liquor licensing, my understanding is liquor licensing has a body that manages the consumption of alcohol, and venues are required to manage the consumption of alcohol and ensure that any patrons, whether they're in a restaurant or in a hotel, are managed the same way, so that when they actually are in the premises or leave the premises, are managed through liquor licensing. Is that a state body control, or do we have other controls to manage that?
Through the chair, I'm not completely familiar with the state body controls, but I do note that the information that the applicant provided in terms of their liquor and gaming assessment, there's very clear information that suggests that it's the licensee's whole requirement to manage the on-premises, and then if drunk and disorderly people, for example, are asked to leave, then I think they're going onto the street, and then that becomes a broader issue. So that they made it very clear that that is how it would operate.
No more questions at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Owen-Jones.
So could I just ask a question in regards to, there was a slide that you put up which specifically referenced bars, which I think was in regards to the small bar. Does not include a bar, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So that That is the small bars, which is 100 square metres and no more than 60 users. Is the 100 square metres the GFA or the net lettable area?
Through the chair, it's the total use area, so that includes that outdoor dining area. And also just additional context in the neighbourhood centre zone. There's an additional sort of tightening of that control in that the consumption of alcohol is only permitted between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. So,
okay.
So the neighbourhood centre goes to the next level as well.
And do you have the slide that shows in the different colours of the different areas for the two joint? Yeah, and so that's the one. No, the one that we've just gone past with the green.
Sorry.
So am I correct in reading that in that current configuration with the back of house doesn't count as... Does the back of house count as GFA or does it count as net lettable area? So
yeah, through the chair it would. The kitchen and the bar area would count as total use area. So.
Okay, and in regards to the small bars, if there are two tenancies side by side, are they both able to be approved for small bars even if there's common ownership?
Through the chair, that is correct in part. I mean, it goes through code assessments, so we would have regard to the applicable benchmarks.
And we count the external public space, which is a right of, I'm assuming, some type of lease or right of use or activation of the footpath. Is that right?
Through the chair, it would be an outdoor dining permit.
And we count that as part of the 100 square metres?
Yeah, that's correct. So that's in instances where we need to clarify car parking, expected demand for car parking, etc. So it is definitely considered.
And in regards to the application and car parking, so there's reference to the 45 or 46 car spaces for the whole of the building, but are we aware of whether or not this lessee has any arrangements in place that actually provide a number of car spaces to their tenancy?
Through the chair, we haven't been provided any information in that regard. That's
right, so it would have helped them if they would have done that.
I mean, to a degree, the Transport Code car parking requirements, officers took it up to the overall outcomes, which is the expected amenity impacts for car parking. So we have acknowledged and identified that the applicant has not addressed the car parking requirements. However, just in that, acceptable outcome up to the overall outcomes, we've taken it there and deemed that it's not, it's a commercial change of use, so expected level of demand could be similar.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Hamill, then Councillor Young.
Madam Deputy Mayor, through you to Councillor Taylor, I'm trying to understand something on this. So it is stated through the report and stated in the submissions and support for this that the owner has no intent of changing the day-to-day operations as they currently are. So could you give us some sense of why the owner is seeking to change their liquor licence, then if there's no intent to change what he currently does?
Yes, and the reason is the current area, as we know, is high density and there's a lot of growth in the area, and the patrons of the area have increased, hence the number of outdoor dining in the area, which is a positive sign for a growing city that we're all wanting and we're wanting to see, and I think we're encouraging. And his trouble is at the moment is the type of venue that he has at the moment has given the ability for people to go down there and have a drink, and he's been able to manage the numbers previously as a bar situation. The trouble he's starting to have now is because it's becoming a popular area because of the growth of the city, he's starting to struggle to manage that offering of actually someone going and having a beer at the pub. So for him to actually manage his liquor licence, he went to liquor licensing to understand how he could improve his offering to maintain for the local community, which they're supportive of. And the trouble we have with liquor licensing, they need to see a change of the usage for him to get that change of operation. So the community is very strong in relation to it being an offering for the area. the challenge is because we're in a high density area, we're growing, which is great. We're getting density in there. We're getting more numbers, hence the growth of that actual area.
So, Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Taylor, so you have provided all councillors with a copy of the letter from the two local groups. Sorry, I thought everyone had it. So, Councillor Taylor, do you understand? So it is obvious in the officer's report that one of the main concerns is while they accept that there is an intent by the current owner just to continue doing exactly what he currently does, that we have no control over what happens next, that the current owner could fall off a cliff tomorrow, someone else buys it, and they then have a hotel approval possibly, and that hotel use comes with other opportunities. So pokies and TAB are anticipated uses in hotel. So through you to Councillor Taylor, do you think the residents that maybe put letters of support in for this support the current business, but do they appreciate that if this business wasn't there, that they could end up with something very different with as of right use approvals?
I acknowledge that I didn't actually go out and canvass if there was gaming, because gaming has always been, yes, it falls under the hotel usage, but also falls under state government. But the answer is no, I did not go out there to the groups, all the groups, and say there could be gaming. The big challenge for the particular area is it's the neighbourhood centre that's a challenge we've got here at the moment. And we're talking about a neighbourhood centre that's designated at the moment that's in the middle of a growing area, which in my view is a dining precinct, which we've already got an extension of time that's acknowledging that it's not just a community centre, it's acknowledging that it is a dining precinct that is going out to 12 o'clock. And part of the offering of these type of areas is the opportunity of a hotel offering, which could, at some point, talk to gaming. It could talk to other activities. As my personal opinion, many people do have different offerings. Everyone don't always go to a high-class restaurant. They don't always go to just a cheap restaurant. There's a pub where you can go and have a meal, and some people may go gaming. My view is we don't control the gaming. We control the hotel usage. State government will determine whether someone can have the machines and whether they're out there.
Follow up, Madam Chair. So I actually think Councillor Taylor makes a point in there that needs to be explored a little bit further, which is if there is a need for what you're suggesting here, then the appropriate way that it would need to happen is that the zoning should change. So it's neighbourhood centre, rightly or wrongly, a neighbourhood centre's got all those things, but it's what it currently is. And if there is a need for that, then that, instead of it being possibly happening this way, it needs to happen through a city plan review process that identifies that, is it a neighbourhood centre as it currently is, or does neighbourhood centre terminology need to change, or does there need to be something specific to this year? And I'm getting at that if the demographics or everything is changing in the area, is this the appropriate way to be going about introducing this into the area, or would it be better for that to be done through the next city plan where, as we look at individual neighbourhood centres and precincts, we could identify that Main Beach is different to all the other neighbourhood centres. They're all different themselves and they all have different...
Or not.
Or not, yeah. I'm just that it's I can understand from the officer's report why there's a concern that what does this open up in other neighbourhood centres? Would you see that if this didn't get through today, that the owner would be interested in pursuing that, or you would be interested in pursuing that through the new city plan, that it's not that far into the future?
I've already spoken to officers about this. It's something that's been on my agenda for quite a while, because the neighbourhood centre, in my view, in the area that we are, I feel is different to a neighbourhood centre, like I call my Sorrento shopping centre, or small areas. My Chevrons, which we had previously a discussion about this, Main Beach, they're actually different areas in in our city, the growing areas, and the dynamics is definitely changing. So in relation to a city plan and us looking as an overall city review of these areas. I think it's important that we are doing this body of work because we are continuing to grow. The challenge is at the moment is you've got a community that's out there at the moment that's wanting and offering as the city's growing, and we all know how the city plan takes to go through. It's an opportunity here to take heed of what the residents are saying. We've got an operator that's trying to do the right thing in relation to liquor licence requirements, and the area is talking to what is actually happening here at the moment. So,
to debate a little further on, Councillor Young, Councillor Borster, Councillor Pauline Young and Councillor O'Neill, in that order.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, officers. Through you, Chair, I appreciate the various arguments, and I certainly was originally considering supporting the recommendation before us, but do you think it's feasible that the changed operation could be appropriately conditioned despite the lack of relevant land use being defined for the site?
Through the Chair, I do not consider it. I think that gaming and other sort of intrinsic values of the hotel land use, that is an entertainment activity. So sort of conditioning against those elements is essentially conditioning against the land use itself.
Understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and through you, Councillor Hamill, good try. Look, I want to show some deference to the divisional councillor and probably to the decision that we've just taken as a committee to deliver quite an uplift of amenity and potentially nighttime activation in a neighbourhood centre. So I don't think...
Can I just say, I'm not picking at you, but
Please.
It had a hotel approval for decades.
Sure.
It's quite different from introducing a hotel approval within a neighbourhood centre today.
Totally. And, you know, I maintain an open and persuadable mind. I'm just saying that interfering with the zoning of an area is probably a very, very blunt instrument when we have the ability to approve things like hotels and neighbourhood centres using a surgical approach. So I just want to, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Taylor, I just want to wrap my head around what has prompted this and its congruence with the feedback from the Main Beach Association. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it intrigues me when I read this correspondence, which I'm assuming is being tabled, so I'm not breaching the Privacy Act here. It says here, I've consulted, this is from the Main Beach Association, I've consulted widely with Main Beach Association members and other residents and find that nobody is objecting Mano's continuing to operate in its current form. See ya.
Grandkids.
Oh, wow. Classic. I don't want to pick on you, but...
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
It was a 5-minute delay.
I had two little people looking at me saying, Grammy.
Yeah,
I'm
good.
so sorry.
Oh no, I'm not going to pick. I'm not going to pick on you, Bluey.
Hopefully, he's lost his train of thought.
No. So my train of thought. The president of the Main Beach Association says here, again, this is through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Taylor. I've consulted widely with MBA members and other residents, tick, and find that nobody, tick, is objecting Mano's continuing to operate in its current form. So could you just explain to me what this approval is attempting to achieve as a change on the ground, day to day, if the support from the community is couched in terms of things remaining the same?
Yeah, as previously mentioned, the bar, as we call it, a bar, but it's under the conditions of the bar.
That's the orange kind of U-shaped thing, right?
Correct. Yeah. So around, and then they've got the dinings more to the front. The conditions of that 60 people, everyone that goes there, see it as a bar, but it has to have the food offering that's there. So it's designed to have a bar operation, but it's got the food component to maintain the current licensing and operational use now. The challenge is at the moment is people are coming down there to actually go and visit as a bar, but the challenge is now, because of the growth, the operator is unable to manage that with the current liquor licensing.
So say, for instance, if I wasn't gluten intolerant and I could still sink a schooner, if I was walking through the outdoor area to that bar area and I ordered a schooner, am I being asked to also order a chicken schnitzel?
Yep.
Is that what's happening at the moment?
Correct. Up to 60 can have a beer.
Okay. Can have a beer only.
Yep.
Up to 60 can have a beer only.
That's my understanding.
I'm sorry, I believe this is a restaurant approval which requires food to be served. It's not a small bar where 60 people can have a drink at present, but it would appear to me from the commentary that people are using it that way and they're happy for it to continue that way, but that's not what we're looking at. It has a restaurant approval which requires food to be served with alcohol. Correct? And possibly this whole application has come about because are we aware of any breach whereby alcohol has been being served without the accompanying food, or have they been reminded by liquor licensing that there is a need to serve food for a restaurant licence?
Yeah, no, this application isn't made in response to a show cause notice.
Okay.
What is probably important to note is the Gold Coast 94 planning scheme had the restaurant land use definition, hotel land use definition. I don't believe it had a bar definition. So this restaurant is probably, the definition you see on the screen is probably a little bit broader to the current scheme. So the scheme started to take away pull away from bar. It's now got its defined use.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, that's germane. It's kind of like your Kira example where there's a long-standing approval in a neighbourhood centre. So, Madam Chair, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I should have said, but also
Whatever.
Chair.
Donna will do. Grammy.
So through you to Councillor Taylor, I'm assuming you've spoken with the applicant.
Yes.
Have they demonstrated any appetite or preparedness to voluntarily submit to added conditions for a potential approval which might fetter their operations so that they are limited to what's currently unfolding, plus just a little bit more?
Are you referring to a hotel with conditions?
So for example, in your discussions with them, and I acknowledge that the issue of pokies hasn't come up, but do you think, would they have an appetite to say, look, we're happy to, if we can get the approval, we're happy to get on board, even if the approval says no poker machines, trading limited to X amount of time, and all patrons have to be seated, for example?
Yes, they're happy to consider any conditions that we think is appropriate.
So, Madam Chair, my last question is through you to our city officers. If the applicant were seeking to, I suppose, legitimise their operations under the current prevailing regulations by seeking this approval, would it be reasonable to work with the applicant to add on additional conditions which might fetter their operations so that they achieve effectively a half a hotel outcome, if it's voluntarily done so on their behalf?
Through the Chair, that's an option available to the Council if that's what it wanted to do. We have had a recent example where there was a similar situation on Chevron Island where we ended up in an appeal. We weren't able to hold on to those conditions which were limiting the gaming. So if the Council wanted to do that, it could, but my advice is I can't guarantee that those conditions would ever withstand a challenge.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. I just wanted to go back to, through you, something that Councillor Taylor said about there's 16 restaurants in the area with unlimited numbers because they're not limited by anything. And I think I'd have to question that because we all know that when you go to a restaurant to eat, you make a reservation and it's availability. So if there's nothing available, you don't all go along and stand around the walls and wait to be able to get a seat. So I think when it comes to saying there's 16 restaurants within an area, there is a limitation on the numbers of people that will attend there. And then the other thing is if there's such a high demand for this sort of offering in the area, I would have expected there would have been far more letters of support, but 10 letters of support in an area that has multiple high-rises and multiple multi-dwelling offerings, I would say that it's potentially a lot of those residents aren't actually aware of what a hotel will bring to an area. And I think we're looking at two...
Councillor Vorster. Yeah. Councillor Young has the floor.
We've got a site here that's actually got 6 shops on site. 2 of these are actually being considered here is the impact on those other businesses in the area if you've got things trading as a hotel, and having seen similar restaurants try and do and who have had compliance orders try and do similar things within an area that are not supported by the local residents. So, and in areas that have got a much bigger turnover of visitors to the area. So I just think, and I was in this area as little as 2 weeks ago, you know, on a Saturday evening, and the thought, the feeling of the area would change substantially if there was a hotel offering in there.
We don't have a motion yet, do we?
No.
But do you have a question, Councillor O'Neill?
I have a couple.
Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. The first one, can I just ask the officer, it's got here that the applicant seeks an extension of hours rate but has not provided specialist documents, e.g. acoustic or social health impact assessments. Were they asked to give those reports and they didn't want to, or...?
Through the Chair, that is correct. So in the information request period, there were specific items with that.
Okay. And the other question that I wanted to ask is, I noticed that they actually provided quite an extensive needs analysis, which was totally discounted by the officers in my reading of it. What sort of needs analysis would you have required to take up? Because they provided things like number of residents in the area grown over so many years. They provided a lot of other information. What actually information would have you been seeking through a needs analysis?
Through the Chair, it's a really good question. It's a difficult one to answer. I think planning needs to be established that this is an entertainment activity. So I'm not sure what information we can get to suggest that what was given, you know, large population, the socioeconomic status of an area, not confident to say that information suggests needs for a entertainment activity of this type. So it is a very difficult question to suggest what they could have done to stack up the planning need. Yeah.
And are they seeking any sort of entertainment, to have any entertainment on the premises if they did get a hotel licence? Do you know? It's because I didn't think they were.
Yeah, through the Chair, there's nothing specifically in their plans that suggest entertainment. However, the city plan in the table of assessment, it defines a hotel as an entertainment activity.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more question too, if I might, just before I go to Councillor Hamill and then Councillor Taylor. You mentioned the outdoor eating area, and I thought you mentioned hours of operation that would be appropriate for a hotel with an outside area as being 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Was that correct?
No, sorry, just to clarify that, it's in the city plan, so a bar is made code accessible where the consumption of alcohol is between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. But there's nothing about the internal or external operations.
So this already has an approval till midnight, this operating restaurant?
Yes, their liquor licence allows them, and then...
and they can use that outdoor area?
Until 11 p.m.
Okay.
That's on page 461. There's a few conditions.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Hamill.
Madam Acting Mayor, through you to Councillor Taylor. I haven't visited Tedder Avenue in probably 6 or 7 months, but I'm interested in talking about demand. Have there been any other small bars open up recently that would demonstrate that there is a desire from the local community for this? Because the market would drive that I knew there were empty shops last time I was on Tedder, and there would be places where a small bar, as per city plan, could be established. Has there been any established?
I would say there would be, over the last couple of years, another 4 or 5 different restaurants that's been established down that street. That particular corner that we're talking about as well, where Mano's is surrounded by Damani's, Shuck across the road, Hot Shots, so that whole...
I think the question was
small bar, yeah. I know, I'm aware that new restaurants opened, but has anyone opened a small bar, as they could under city plan in a neighbourhood centre? I'm correct? Yep.
Not what I'm aware of, as a bar.
Councillor Peter Young, you had your hand up?
No, that was my younger brother. I don't have any further questions. I think my chief question was answered. This, if we were to seek to approve this as the applicant wishes, couldn't be appropriately conditioned, is my take on the whole matter.
Councillor Taylor, another question?
Yes, thank you. I just want to clarify something. We did the information request and got a reply. Do we ever send additional information requests to clarify some of the questions that may have been raised, as mentioned by Councillor O'Neill?
Through the chair, no. There was not a formal further advice, but there was a number of email correspondence and meetings with the applicant in respect to the land use. I think the most important element is the land use, and then the other technical items very well could have been addressed. However, the applicant's opportunity to address that, they didn't.
Okay, councillors, I'm looking for a motion. Does anyone... Sorry, Councillor O'Neill, one more question.
Have we ever approved a hotel site in a neighbourhood centre before in the city?
Kira.
Can you... Apart from Kira.
Through the chair, under city plan, I'm not familiar of any.
Okay, thank you.
Now, you can't move a motion, so is this another question?
Look, no, I would...
Okay, so you can wait for debate. Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. I'll move the officer's recommendation.
And that's seconded by Councillor Owen-Jones. Would you like to speak to that?
Just briefly, and I'm very mindful of the representative, or the representation made by the divisional councillor and the material that is brought forward for us for our consideration. But I am sympathetic to the desires of the local community, and that would normally completely prevail in my position. But my concern was the appropriate conditioning of any land use that's not envisaged in the current town plan for the site, and I don't think the appropriate conditions can be applied in a ways that can achieve, that we can confidently provide protection of people's amenity into the future, apart from those that have seemingly sought to support this as it is. So without that, I think we're in a bind. I'm mindful of the fact that Tedder Avenue is a very different place as opposed to the neighbourhood centres that are in my division, and I'm mindful of the local amenity and the fact that people might currently be using this facility for a purpose that wasn't entirely intended to be used, and that's just a kind of natural process that it might occur over time. But I don't think we're in a position to approve anything apart from anything that's apart from what's been suggested to us by the officers in their recommendation. I think it's a good report, and well done.
Thanks, Councillor Young. Speaker against? Councillor O'Neill.
I know this is a bit unusual, and I just understand in the area that the Tedder Avenue used to be and maybe not anymore, and how it used to operate, how it wants to operate again. And I think that the applicant is actually trying to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing, because if he does start servicing people that he shouldn't be servicing and just giving them drinks, he will get himself into a whole lot of trouble. And I think this is probably his way of avoiding that. The fact that he doesn't want to really change his operation but provide the service that everyone is expecting, I have some sympathy for. And when I saw those letters, I was absolutely surprised that those groups, that sort of swayed me a bit too. So I am going to vote against this, even though we haven't successfully done this before. I was hoping that we could do this with conditions, but just that information about Chevron has obviously put a quasher on that. But I'm actually just going to go with my gut on this one. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll have a speaker for, if I could.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to speak in favour of the officer's refusal, and I think it's in the context that the city plan as it exists actually enables proprietors to make application for small bars, and that would have probably been a bit more appropriate in this particular location. I think that it actually is a challenge that the number of car parks can't be easily identified to the use. I am not an infrequent visitor to the main beach area, and I think that if anybody wants to have a drink, it's pretty easy. And in particular, we've got the Southport Yacht Club and the Southport Surf Lifesaving Club basically offering the ability for people to partake in a drink without the inclusion of food. So whereas I think that Tedder Avenue has always enabled the activation of restaurants and the coupling of that with the dining experience. So I think that the better option here would have been an application under the small bars direction, and that would have given them some different options.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Owen-Jones. Did you wish to speak, Councillor Taylor, because then I'm going to take the vote.
Thank you. Look, as I've mentioned today, we're in a high-density area. The city is growing. These areas are changing. The community wants a offering that is provided for that particular area, and it's important that as a city we do understand our growth of our city and we review it accordingly. But also when there's operators that are trying to do the right thing as well, we should be in a position to actually understand that, and I think that's our job here, is to understand what we can make a decision on. And it was really important for me to understand that it was an offering for the community and that's why I went out there and got a broad view, and obviously the local associations were very important to part of that discussion. But this is an operator that's trying to do the right thing under current conditions. We talk about transport, it's always mentioned in relation to we don't want people on roads. We so often mention in our city plan that we don't want cars out there. We talk about light rail. This venue is just in that light rail corridor. We've got uplift, we've got people that can walk to those areas, so we don't want them to get in a car and drive at a further distance. So this is just a venue that's got a providing offering to the community that needs a change that I think is suitable for that particular area. And when we come to full council, I'd like to think that I could look at a change with some conditions that could be considered. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. And just before I go to Councillor Young to close, I just want to re-emphasise that despite the fact that this operator might be trying to do the right thing, as has been suggested, should a hotel operation be approved on this site, the approval goes with the land, not with the applicant. We have no assurance whatsoever what happens from this point forward because the approval goes with the land. And for me, personally, it's disconcerting that no acoustics report was provided and that no social health impact assessment was provided, despite those requests being put forward. But most importantly, the approval goes with the land. Is that appropriate at this location within a neighbourhood centre? I'm not convinced that we haven't foreseen many unintended consequences of what is being proposed. So I'll go to you to close.
I think you've summarised it well, Deputy Mayor. I think that's where we're at. If we were to approve it, it just leaves us really exposed in the future because there are ungovernable conditions or conditions that could not really be properly exercised in response to any future complaints on that basis. And I'm sorry, because Councillor Taylor did mention this to me before the meeting, and I'm sympathetic to his representation and the position of the local community, but I think overwhelmingly it's a position we can't support. Thanks.
Okay, that debate is closed and I'll take the vote. Those in favour? Against? Do you want your name recorded? No? Okay, that is carried. Thank you, councillors. Now we go to 6.5. And Councillor Young, you wanted a presentation on this one? Okay, sure. Is this our last item? One more? 6.8, okay. Oh, would you like to have a 10-minute break, councillors? Okay, let's come back at 11:15.
Excuse me, could I just say hello to Tanya? Hello, Tanya.
Wife.
Who did not just say, who's Tanya?
He just said, who's Tanya? And we saw her the other night and she tunes in and we said we'd say hello. Okay, sorry to digress.
If William's throwing a tantrum, she puts...
That's very funny.
And that's not me.
Thank you. Now to more serious matters. Councillor Young, you wanted a presentation on item 6.5, so please proceed.
Through you, Madam Chair, this presentation is regarding the impact assessable application at 1 Adjourned Way, Gaven. The proposal seeks an educational establishment for carpentry training. The subject site is 4,037 square metres in size and includes a 66 metre frontage to Bunyula Drive, which is a service road to the Pacific Motorway, and also includes a 60 metre frontage to Arjuna Way. The subject site is identified within the rural residential zone. The proposed development seeks to utilise a recently approved and constructed 360 square metre shed, as demonstrated in yellow on the site plan. It's important to note that this shed was approved through a referral assessment application, and this was done prior to the lodgement of the subject MCU application. There is an existing dwelling house on site and separate shed, which will remain unchanged as a result of the proposal. The educational establishment will facilitate carpentry training, which is encompassing approved courses associated with the Certificate 3 carpentry course. The proposal has 13 on-site car parking spaces and available space for a small rigid vehicle standing area. In support of the application, the applicant submitted an operational management plan which detailed specific operational parameters for the educational establishment. The hours of operation are 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday to Friday. The use is only permitted to facilitate battery-operated tools, and these are only permitted to be used between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday to Friday. The use is limited to a maximum of 10 students and 2 staff permitted on site at any one time. Key considerations of the assessment included visual amenity. So in regards to the built form, the proposal is to be undertaken within the approved shed, which is constructed on site already. In order to reduce any perceived predominance of the shed, officers have requested increased landscaping buffers from that previously approved from the referral agency assessment application, which will screen the shed when viewed in both directions. The landscaping buffer will incorporate both trees and screening shrubs in quite a dense setting. In terms of noise, the subject site has an existing high background noise level due to the proximity of Bunyula Drive and the Pacific Motorway. Notwithstanding, officers acknowledge there are multiple sensitive receivers within the immediate proximity of the site. In order to maintain noise levels, significant operational restrictions have been conditioned, and one of these includes ensuring all doors and windows are closed during the operation of handheld tools. A total of 24 submissions were received during the public notification period. These were 23 in objection and 1 in support. The concerns raised in relation to the proposed development included amenity, character, operational restrictions, environmental impacts, parking access, and the appropriateness of the land use within the immediate locality. The matters raised by submitters are being considered throughout the assessment of the application. Overall, officers have completed a detailed assessment against City Plan as a whole to determine that through recommended conditions, the proposed development is of an appropriate scale for the subject site, and officers are recommending approval. Are there any questions?
Councillor Young.
I wonder if you could please go into a bit more detail about the approval on the big shed on the site.
Yeah, no worries. So the shed was approved through the RAA process, and that is a siting variation. So the building certifier would send that in. And we're looking, the criteria for that is adverse amenity impacts. So within that assessment, officers determined that the shed was not of an adverse amenity impact, and landscaping was also proposed, and that approval was granted in October of 2021.
And that approval was granted by a private certifier?
we are a referral agency and we supported that request, and then the certifier provided certification for the construction.
Thank you.
Does that process come through the DART system? So would have there been a line of sight to council? Like, I mean, is there not? So I don't know what you do, Pete, and I'm not picking on you. No, but as in, so in the DART, we actually can see if certain things come through, and you can ask for additional information. But is that referral, would have it been through the DART system as well?
Through you, Madam Chair, no. We get around 50 to 60 referral agency applications a week. We just don't have the resources to put them on the DART.
Yeah.
As Emily has said, our jurisdiction is just on the citing of these applications, and on that basis our assessment criteria was fairly limited. So standard policy in terms of assessing that RAA, officers provided favourable comments to the private certifier for the private certifier to approve it.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Emily, forgive me, I can't find it, but did I read somewhere in this report where it says that this wouldn't be allowed in an industrial zone area?
Through you, Madam Chair, in the industrial zone, and education establishment is not a listed activity, so there is some conflict in an industrial area if such an application was lodged. In the rural residential zone, education establishments are a contemplated land use where they're of an appropriate size and scale.
So just to clarify with Roger, so if someone made this application in a small industrial unit inside an industrial area, if they called it an education establishment, they'd have a problem. Could they call it something else? I was surprised to read that this isn't something, and I'd have no problem with this as a pre-context, but I was just surprised that someone couldn't propose to do this inside a 200-metre industrial unit as part of a complex.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's an easier process in the rural residential zone of this size and scale. There are some tension points within the industrial zones for an education establishment. Not to say that you can't, it's just a harder road to get to.
Thank you, appreciate the clarification.
Chair, I'll move the officer's recommendation with a slight change to condition 10. It should come up on our screen. This just relates to the landscaping works, and the addition that I'm seeking is just for some garden beds adjacent to the big shed to be planted out with shrubs. The condition's been prepared by officers.
Can I second that, please?
Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Young?
Just briefly, it's a very diverse city, as has been shown in the agenda before us today, and the kind of matters that we're dealing with. Generally speaking, people don't like change, and there were a number of submissions made about this proposal. I've met with the operator. I'm mindful of the submissions that the local committee made. I think he's a good operator. I think he's very genuine. I think he's presented himself in a way that's mindful of and respectful for the local community, and he's appropriately changed his proposal over time. I think it'll be a really good enterprise, a great enterprise to have young people being trained in carpentry and building skills on the site. There's a great operational management plan that's fully detailed in the report before us and will be available publicly, and that restricts the use to, as we heard, only 10 students at a time. No power tools, they're only electrically operated, battery operated tools. All the works have to be done within the shed itself, which has been acoustically treated so as to prevent the leakage of noise out to the local community. It's overall a pretty good proposal, I think, and although I'm mindful of those community concerns, I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to just comment myself that it's great to see the level of acoustic reporting provided on this, and it does give us greater confidence when the reports that are necessary to inform our decision-making are comprehensive, and this one was. Would anyone else like to speak to this item, or I'll go to you to close, Councillor Young?
The thing I didn't mention was the visual amenity of the site. It's open, it's barren, it looks pretty ugly, and I think that the works that will be achieved through the landscaping will improve the presentation of the site dramatically over time.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take the vote. All in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, item 6.8, the City Plan Major Amendment to Environmental Mapping.
There should be something coming up on the screen.
So the officers might like to give a quick overview that you had raised an issue with a site in Birds Road that had been cleared, and the new mapping wasn't reflective of the planting that we have required, the replanting on that site, and you would like to see it reinstated.
Yes, it's a weird circumstance whereby the site had been cleared, aerial mapping, photography and mapping had been undertaken, which showed the cleared area now cleared and not included in the vegetation that should be protected. Through this anomaly, we've got an opportunity to draw attention to that and resurrect things. So we'll hopefully.
So are there some words to, because I think everyone was quite happy with the report. We didn't need, we'd seen it before, but if we could just see the words that Councillor Young would like included.
So I'll move this. It's a change recommendation with the yellow part there being the addition. So the environmental and zone mapping for that particular site in Guanabara be corrected to reflect what did exist beforehand, and that be submitted to the state for consideration as part of the addendum and so forth.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pauline Young. Thank you, Councillor Young. Young and Young.
Not for young and old.
What a team.
Oh, that's a good one.
Would you like to speak further, Councillor Young?
No, thanks.
Anybody else? No questions?
Except
we'll take
to say
the vote.
thanks to the officers for their quick response this morning.
Bravo.
Thank you. Director, the officers have been great today. Thank you. Okay, we'll take the vote. All in favour? That is carried. And there's no general business. Meeting closed at 11:31.